Hello everyone! In today's video I'm really excited to share my thoughts on my first read of 2026, which is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. Now, this is a short book, but please do not be fooled. It is a really interesting, engaging, thought-provoking read, so if this is kind of up your alley, then it's definitely a recommendation I would give. It's a prize winner and won the Booker Prize in 2024, and for very good reason is what I'm going to say. It's very interesting in that it's good for kind of conversational pieces. It talks about a lot of topical things, so book club readers, this would be a fantastic choice as well. I'm really happy I started my 2026 with this read, and this video is all about telling you why. Before I get into my thoughts on the book, I'm just going to give you a quick recap of the synopsis so you know what it's about. Life on our planet as you've never seen it before. 6 astronauts rotate in their spacecraft above the Earth. They are there to collect meteorological data and conduct scientific experiments, but mostly they observe. Together they watch our silent blue planet. Endless shows of spectacular beauty witnessed in a single day. Yet although separated from the world, they cannot escape its constant pull. News reaches them of a death of a mother, and with it comes thoughts of returning home. The fragility of human life fills their conversations, their fears, their dreams. So far from Earth, they have never felt more apart or protective of it. They begin to ask, what is life without Earth? What is Earth without humanity? Now, like I said, this is a very good book for kind of conversation pieces, and there's a lot of topics it kind of goes into. So we look at everything from the likes of the impacts of going into space on their physical kind of well-being and their health, of the kind of the trajectory of the International Space Station and how witnessing 16 sunrises and sunsets impacts their kind of concept of time and their body clocks and stuff like that, which you wouldn't maybe necessarily think was interesting, but I did. It's to get the kind of intimate detail we get on these 6 astronauts, but also how they are impacted by being out in space. I loved getting that detail, and it felt really quite immersive because we got to know these 6 people very intimately. With being set on the International Space Station, we almost live in a bit of a microclimate on this book, where we have 6 people from different places across the Earth. I believe there are 2 Russians, there's an American, a British, Italian, and Japanese. So we have quite a spectrum. And you'd like to think that living in such a small space and being so dependent on each other that you wouldn't really have any of kind of the Earth politics, but that's not the case. So that was really quite interesting to read and observe how, for example, the two Russian astronauts that are up there kind of have their own resources and they can't touch the Americans and the Americans don't touch the Russians. And, you'd like to think in that kind of scenario where you are reliant on just a handful of people that all of that would kind of go away. And it kind of does in terms of the way like Roman and Anton deal with the other astronauts, like that there's no necessary conflict between them over beliefs or anything like that. But you do this kind of see this segregation in that there is a Russian section of the station and there is everybody else. So politics unfortunately does kind of still have its grip even as everyone's rotating the Earth, and you'd like to think it wasn't a thing, but apparently it is. I found that quite interesting. I would have thought kind of in that international space it would all be very collaborative, but I guess people are people, so no. One of the things I really found fascinating about this book in terms of kind of going into the people's daily lives is looking at kind of what being in space does to them physically. Now, I believe they're only up there for about 9 months at a time, but the book kind of discusses how they have to work out quite intensely, including like simulating gravity to weight train and do all that kind of thing. But even still, doing that 2 hours a day isn't enough to prevent their muscles atrophying due to the lack of gravity. So it's this kind of micro detail that really makes this feel like you're there with them. And although it's a very kind of open book in that it talks about a lot of broad topics, like you still feel like you're there. So it balances that really well for me. I thought the commentary on kind of the health of astronauts and what being in space does to them ended up being quite a topical aspect of the book. If you're not aware, the crew that were recently up there had to evacuate due to a medical emergency, and that kind of is covered somewhat in the book, in that obviously if something happens up there, you don't necessarily have access to medics, and combine that with the fact that, you know, being up there impacts your heart health and other things like that, kind of puts you more at risk. So that turned out to be quite an interesting read, and obviously now having seen what's happened in kind of real life kind of really hammers that home. Imagine seeing 16 sunrises and sunsets every day. Well, if you're on the International Space Station, you do. This obviously has a major impact on astronauts' kind of body clocks and concepts of time. And, you know, you don't really think about that sort of thing until you pick up a book like Orbital. Now, what I also really loved about this book is that it also kind of has a map of the trajectory of the space station. So as you go through this book, you can kind of follow and picture where they're at. Now, the events in this book happen over the course of a day, and those kind of timelines are segregated by which orbit number they are around the Earth at the time. So, for example, your chapter headings are which orbit they're in and which way they're going around the Earth as well, which is really quite a fun way to do it, and obviously break up the day, because otherwise how do you differentiate the day when you're up there? It all looks the same. So I really quite like that. And having that map as a visual guide also really helped kind of hammer home where they were, what they were doing, and gives it some context. This book discusses some quite big topics while we're up there, not necessarily just on kind of an intimate personal level. There is a very big kind of personal storyline that's behind this book, and I'll cover that in a minute. But for example, the synopsis indicates that they're there to collect meteorological data, and one of the kind of events in this book is that the astronauts are observing a typhoon, which is on track to hit, I believe, like the Philippines, that kind of area. And throughout the cycle of this book, they're kind of watching this storm grow, and it ends up being like a Category 5 typhoon. It's devastating when it hits. So it's a kind of about how the astronauts witness, photograph, and kind of offer this commentary down to people on Earth as to what this storm looks like, estimates of when they think it's going to hit the Philippines, but also kind of like the powerlessness of watching it happen but being able to do absolutely nothing about it. So, you know, it's devastating and interesting how, you know, we can observe these kind of things and the power of Mother Nature, but actually, even though you've got the, you know, resources and whatever to be up in space and doing things that the vast majority of people can't do, you know, there's still something, you know, you can't do, and you can't help those people that maybe don't evacuate because they don't want to leave their property, or, you know, are at risk of losing what little they have. Now, the personal story that impacts I believe the Japanese astronaut Chi, is that while she is on board and fulfilling her duties, her mother sadly passes away. She finds out quite early in the book. So one of kind of the big personal stories is about how she handles grief, and obviously not being able to be there while her Mother's funeral takes place, and kind of how she copes with that separation, but also obviously kind of the pull to want to being home and wanting to be there with her family at such an important time, but also the pull of doing what she loves and obviously being up in space, and it's kind of like her childhood dream. So there's this kind of internal conflict, if you like, going on where, there's this pull to Earth to go home, the love of the planet that they were born from and that sort of thing. But also their like childhood dreams and aspirations and how they got there and that sort of thing. It's an interesting conflict, actually. And I guess you'd have to have a really strong will and belief to obviously go through all the training and, end up in space. Like, not very many people would be privileged enough, but also go through some risks. And that kind of is also covered in this book. In particular, there is brief mention to what happens to Space Shuttle Challenger, when it unfortunately set fire during orbit, which I knew something about, but what this book was quite nice at doing is that it kind of briefly covered what happened, but not in a way that if I wanted to go and read more, which I do, it spoils it for me. It's enough of kind of a sample of what's happened, and the same is kind of true with all of the topics that are discussed in this book, that, you can either read it and go, oh, that's interesting, and move on, or it can be a prompt to make you go, oh, actually, okay, I want to find out more about that, and, it gives you that step up, I suppose, to go and read more about it. So Challenger is one of those things for me that I want to go and read out more on based on this book. Now, I did actually get myself a copy of a book about Space Shuttle Challenger before Christmas, but picking this up is probably going to make me read that a little bit sooner than maybe I'd intended when I bought the book. So as this review kind of probably tells you, like, I've spoken about a lot, and this book is 136 pages. Like, sometimes it can be hard to review a short book, either because not much happens or, that kind of thing. But Orbital covers a lot of ground in not a lot of page count, and that I really enjoyed. So again, this is going to work really well for readers who like to sort of get into some serious topics, but maybe don't necessarily want to bog themselves down in a really lengthy book on any one given subject. So those are my thoughts on Orbital. I really enjoyed this book. I hope I can encourage you to go and pick this up for yourself, even if you just want to have a little dabble in what kind of space is all about. It's a really interesting personal story, and it covers a lot of big topics in an approachable way. So I think this could be a very good read for anyone who wants to give something a little bit different a try. So I hope I have encouraged you to pick up Orbital. If not, that's fair enough. But fingers crossed you can maybe have a go at picking up something different. I really enjoyed this read as something different, and that's why I picked it up as my first read of 2026. If you aren't going to pick up Orbital, what was your first read of 2026? Until next time, bye for now.